Hey everybody, welcome to Lunch with PB&J.
We're back.
We are back and we decided to dress alike, apparently.
No, we didn't decide.
We didn't decide to
We
do
just
that.
think alike.
We're not that couple, guys. Sorry to disappoint you. You probably thought we were the couple that go to like Wonderland and stuff and like, oh, they wear matching shirts. We don't. It's the only matching shirts we have. And it just so happened I left while Joy was still sleeping today, so she had no idea what I was wearing.
No.
Unless you peeked.
I might have. What's he wearing today? I want to match him. No.
You subconsciously in your dream state saw me put this on, and then you woke up.
You know what I was thinking today? Comfortable. That's what I was thinking. I want to be comfortable.
Same, but I'm in the office today, and so I thought, how can I be comfortable but still look kind of like I'm a pastor? And so I thought I'll wear a church shirt.
There you go.
Church sweater. Comfy. So, Joy, what are we doing?
We are reading Ruth. The Book
are?
of Ruth. Is that what you studied for?
I thought it was Esther, the other girl Bible. No. Ruth it is.
Yeah.
I chose this, didn't I?
You did.
I did.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
So, Ruth, you want to tell us about Ruth? You want me to?
You go ahead.
Okay. So Ruth is unique in that it really speaks about God more indirectly through prayers and blessings. I read something. There's something like 84 verses in the entire book of Ruth. 84 verses, and something like 72 of them or something like that are dialogue. So it really is just conversation between Ruth and Naomi and Boaz and some of the other characters. And so it's unique in that sense that it's not talking about God directly, but more indirectly through this look at people's lives.
Right.
And so it really is a very personable, very relatable book in that sense of you're just getting a glimpse into kind of everyday characters and everyday choices that these characters are making.
I saw it kind of like it's like this piece of the puzzle to the God story.
Yes, because there's a lot of, it shows kind of how everyday choices impact and foreshadow kind of what is going on in our lives. So it shows how everyday choices impact our lives, but then it also foreshadows the work of Jesus. And so it's kind of this overall story. There's no miracles. There's no revelations. There's no prophecies, no real mention of religion even as they go through it. Outside of it talks about, Ruth makes a statement, will say, your God will be my God and things like that. And what it does is it introduces this idea of what's called a Kinsmen Redeemer. Joy's going to tell you about that now.
I'm not there yet. I haven't
I'm
studied
just
for
kidding.
that yet. Don't scare me.
It comes later.
Yeah.
But the idea of a Kinsman Redeemer, and I'm going to tell you this now. It's kind of a spoiler alert, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, just so that you can be watching for it as we read through it together. Right. A Kinsman Redeemer is defined. It's a relative who helps a troubled family member. All right. So there's a family member in trouble. Another family member comes in and says, "Hey, I'm going to help you out.
I'm going to redeem this family."
Yeah, and so that's what a Kinsman Redeemer is. And so you're going to see that take place later on in the Book of Ruth. And this really foreshadows the work of Jesus. And so I just want you to understand that as we go through it, because otherwise you might be listening, if you're reading through Ruth for the first time with us, you might go, what is this? What does this have to do with God? What's this have to do?
Well, because it does read different, right? We just got done with Peter. And so that's that verse. You can take it verse by verse, and it's just this meatiness verse by verse. But this is more of a person's testimony, right?
Yeah.
Of what God did in their life. And so the same, and when you go and share your testimony with somebody and the story of your life, you're getting that. You're just getting this full picture. So it reads a little bit different in the way we'll have to kind of break it down.
It does. We have no idea how this is going to go.
But we did Jonah that one time.
We did Jonah one time.
Yeah.
We did. So it's similar to that. So that's it. We'll just start there. All right. So we'll dive into Ruth chapter 1, starting at verse 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judea,
Spit it out.
Slow down here. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon, sure, and Chilion.
That's what
you know why I'm having a hard time is look at my note. Like, look at my Bible. My Bible has so many lines in this verse right here, and it's all broken up by words.
Yeah.
You can tell I was doing a word study at some point. So these guys, they were Ephrathites.
I would say Ephrathites.
Okay. We'll go with hers. From Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, and when they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi. You say Naomi or Naomi? Doesn't matter. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or her husband.
Yeah.
So, when the judges ruled, we'll just kind of go through. This is still a little bit of context to get into the story.
Right.
So when the judges ruled, this was before they chose a king. So in your Bible, this is really placed. The Book of Ruth is really placed chronologically in the Bible there, and so it comes after the Book of Judges. That's where Judges kind of ruled the nation of Israel, and then it comes before Samuel, which is where they go to Samuel and they say, "Listen, we're sick of the judges. We want a king."
Yeah.
And so it's still before they chose a king. So it's when the judges ruled. That's what that means. And God had given them judges. This is going to come into play a little later on. That's why this is important, is because God gave judges to settle disputes. Okay. So this was not a particular proud time in the history of Israel. The Book of Judges, which comes just before the Book of Ruth, it ends with this statement that Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. So people were running buck wild.
Yeah.
That's basically what it means, is they were doing whatever they wanted. They were really kind of ignoring God.
But I think, too, like, it's interesting to know that this is what they were doing, but it was this thing where God wanted to be their king. He had created, hey, I'm going to give you a judge to help, make decisions and things, but they didn't have a king in the sense of a man.
Right.
But God had placed himself as, hey, I want to be your king. But the reason they were just doing whatever seemed right in their own eyes is not because they didn't have,
Didn't have authority. Yeah.
It's that they were rejecting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we join the story during a time of famine. There's a strong likeliness that this famine is God's punishment for worship of other gods. This was kind of a running theme throughout the Old Testament with the nation of Israel. God constantly told them, hey, if you guys will listen to the authority, obey the authority, you're going to be a blessed nation.
Yeah.
You're going to have everything you need provided. But if not, man, it's going to be rough.
Yeah.
And so because of that, whenever famine would strike or things like that, it's usually a pretty good indicator that Israel is out of alignment with the authority of God.
Right.
All right. So during this time, the land where they are, the promised land, there's other inhabitants there. There's the Canaanites, and the Canaanites was another group of people, nation of people, and they actually believed that one of their gods, the god Baal, owned the land that they lived on. And under Joshua, when Joshua was kind of the leader of Israel, God had instructed Israel to purge the land of idols, of all idols, including Baal, and instead they allowed the idols to remain. You can go back and read this in Joshua, and this caused a temptation for Israel to trust Baal rather than trust God when it came to crops and blessing of their agriculture and blessing of the land and things like that. So anyway, as a result, I just think that's interesting. That's what goes on there. So as a result of the famine, Elimelech decides to take his wife Naomi and their sons, and they move to Moab, which is another nation that's about 50 miles away, which doesn't seem like a long way when you can drive.
When you're going on foot, though.
All right. Well, when you're going on foot and you try to pack up your family and go, it's quite a ways.
Yeah.
So Moab, to kind of know the context of Moab, Moab was a nation that had actually oppressed Israel during the time of the judges. So obviously that had created a lot of tension and a lot of hostility between the people of Moab and the people of Israel. And yet Moab had food. And so Amalek decides, I'm going to go and I'm going to live in this land. I'm going to take my family to live in this land. And it's interesting, if you go actually to Deuteronomy 23 and verses 3 to 6, it tells us that the inhabitants of Moab had been excluded from being a part of the assembly of the Lord. All right. And actually, they were excluded. In other words, what that meant was they literally could not be saved.
Wow.
They could not become a part of Israel. They were doomed, basically, and for 10 generations.
Wow.
And the reason for that, if you read again Deuteronomy 23,
I think I know, but yeah.
Okay, is why? Let's see if you're right.
Because
look at my notes.
Because during the Exodus, they would not let Israel go through their land.
Boom! Look at her go.
I wasn't sure though.
Scholar. All right. Yeah, they had not helped Israel after they left Egypt.
Okay.
They wouldn't allow them to go.
So on a side note, it matters how we treat Israel, right? So it's that thing, right?
It really does, yeah. And so take all that into account. This is probably not the best place for Amalek to go with his family. So again, this is important because what we're talking about through the Book of Ruth is how the choices we make today determine the stories we tell tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And so that was part of what was going on here. So he goes and he settles. What we get in the verses that we just read is Amalek dies. Naomi's sons end up marrying women from Moab, which is, again, kind of interesting because while it wasn't forbidden that they would do that, it was, as you can imagine, highly discouraged that they would do that. Mainly, the reason for that is because the Moabites worshipped false gods, and that was always the concern that God had, is that if you marry with these other people, that you're going to end up falling away from me, and you're going to worship these false gods. Because evangelistic dating very rarely works out in favor of the evangelist.
Yes, it usually goes the opposite way.
Usually goes the other way, and that's a very biblical principle that we're not going to go into today, but if you'd like to talk about it, send us an email, all right? So 10 years later, the boys die as well, and Naomi is left alone. That's where we are. Do you have anything else on the context?
So, you know me, I'm sure, in the sense of names, right? I got real caught up in the meaning of names in this part of the scripture. Because it's obvious, even, as we go through it, it's obvious that it comes out. The meaning of their names have purpose here. So I'm just kind of gonna say the meaning of the names just to kind of get us started. And then as we go, it comes out of how important that is. But so Elimelech, if that's how you say his name, I find this so interesting because his name means my God is king. And the reason I find that interesting is because of the place of this story is, Ben just explained it, of here we have, judges, and God was trying to be their king, and they were living any way they wanted to, rejecting God as king, saying we don't have a king. And then you get to Samuel, so Ruth is in the middle, then you get to Samuel, and they reject the judges and they want a king. And I just think that's really interesting, the guy's name here of what was happening in this season of Israel is my God is king. So for this family, we really see how God is working in this family, even in a season where they were rejecting God as king. For this family and what we see God do in this family, we see that, like, eventually, I don't want to be too much of a spoiler, but the King of Kings comes through this family line, right? But it's just, I find that interesting because there's purpose in a name, and we learn that, but it speaks to what's happening in that season of Israel, of God wanted to be their king. Right? Then you have Naomi. Naomi, his wife, it means pleasant or sweetness, and that comes into play later. There's a name she calls herself later that's Mara, and that's bitter one. Malon means sickness. Kilion means pining or a wasting away. And as we see already, they die, right?
Yeah.
They die early. Ruth means friend, and that is a perfect description of what she is in the story. Orpah means gazelle. I really haven't made any sense of that.
She jumps all over
I
the
think
place.
it means she kind of runs back home.
Oh, okay.
No, I think I'm digging there, but Orpah. But yeah, as we go, we'll see really the meaning of these names come out.
Mm-hmm. And
in times past, I've read stuff and realized, okay, why is there such why is there importance of the meaning of people's names? And we see that God does that. He uses that. You think of the example of Abram to Abraham. Abram means exalted father, and then Abraham means father of a multitude. So when God calls him and says, I'm going to make you the father of nations, the father of a multitude, he changes his name.
Right.
So there's purpose in names. And here we'll see in the story that there's purpose of names. Yeah.
Good.
So that was very interesting to me.
I knew the name thing would come out.
Yeah.
I knew it.
The other factor, and I won't really go into it too much because it has to piece together, but the idea of kind of like you talked about Moab and how they were Israel's enemy, and there was tension there, and they were a pagan nation. Later on, kind of there's more description. I would just want to bring in the description of like Moab and the representation of basically how serious it is that they went to Moab.
Yeah.
And what that means, yeah.
Yeah. So verse 6 says, Then Naomi heard in Moab, so that she's still living there with Ruth and Orpah. It says, Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. Mm-hmm. So we'll pause there for a second. This is the return to Bethlehem. Mm-hmm. I kind of broke it down into sections. This is the return to Bethlehem. So these 3 women, they pack up and they get ready to head back to Bethlehem, which is the sensible choice.
Yeah.
All right. As widows at that time, they had very, very limited options, limited opportunities of how to support themselves. There was really no place. They were in a place in Moab. They were in a place where Naomi had no family.
Yeah.
And normally, when you became a widow, you would lean into your family. You rely on family. But she had no family there. And you would say, well, what about Ruth and Orpah? They had family there. But once you got married, like, you were really cut off from your parents.
Yeah.
You were cut off from your family, and you became a part of that other family. And so they were very limited, and they risked, if they stayed in Moab, they really risked being lowered all the way down to the level of a slave, or there were, again, very few options, and so there was some really nasty options that they would have had to kind of take part in to support themselves, and so they would have almost been lowered down to beggar status if they had stayed there. So they head back, but as I read that, it says in verse 8, I think it's in, verse 8, it says, but on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. And I read that, and I thought, how hard was the journey?
Yeah.
All right? They're going back to Bethlehem, where they think, okay, maybe we can get some support there. Maybe we can find someone to help us there. Maybe it'll be better. They got crops there again. Like, maybe we can go there, and it's going to be better. But how hard was the journey that on the way, like, it wasn't even before they left Moab. It was on the way back to Bethlehem. Naomi just stops in the middle of the road and just goes, Listen, girls, I think it'd be better if you just went home.
Yeah.
Like, don't come with me. Go back to where, go back, find husbands. It's going to be too hard if you stay with me, And she uses this word in verse 8. She says it's because of their kindness. She said, may the Lord reward you. So here's that blessing where we start to see the character of God and the things of God kind of talked about through conversation. she uses this word kindness. May the Lord bless you because of your kindness to your husbands and to me. And that word kindness is a Hebrew word that I can't pronounce Hebrew properly, but it's like hesed, all right, is how it's spelt anyway. And so it's this Hebrew word, and what it means, it's used throughout the Old Testament, but it's used most of the time, the context it's used in is actually speaking of God's covenant loyalty to his people.
Wow.
So what that means is God had made promises to the nation of Israel. They are his people, all right? The people of Israel are God's people, and he's made a covenant with them that if you will be my people, I will be your God. And so throughout their history, God shows his kindness towards them. And it's a covenant loyalty that involves a grace being extended to them, even when it's undeserved.
Yeah.
And so there's all these moments in Israel's history where they rebelled against God, they defied his authority, all these things, and yet God in his grace continued to be their God and continued to be kind to them. Yes, there were punishments, yes, there was all those things, but God continued to extend grace even though they didn't deserve it.
Right.
And so what you have here is she's using this word kindness, and Naomi speaks this blessing over Orpah and Ruth for their loyalty to not only her boys, not only to their husbands, but also to her. And so you go back to that decision that Naomi's husband made to move the family to Moab. They were foreigners in a hostile land.
Yeah.
And yet these women came, they not only married the husbands, but now they have become a part of the family, and there's a kindness that is given. And so I just thought it was interesting that word there. And then the other thing that is interesting here is, again, it's a return to Bethlehem. So they're going back, and this whole story is one of redemption. And this idea of a return or a redemption, it's kind of like when Naomi says, you know what, let's go back to Bethlehem.
Yeah.
She's almost redeeming the choice that her husband made, you know? And so Naomi's decision to return is kind of reversing that decision that maybe they shouldn't have gone there in the first place, but now we're going to go back to where we're supposed to be. And so it really is this return. And so she turns her back on Moab, turns her back on this hostile land, turns her back on a place that she wasn't supposed to go, a land that had looked good in the beginning, you know. Just so you know, the grass is not always greener on the other side. It may look greener from your perspective, but, you know, maybe sometimes you just need to stay, as they say, stay and water your own lawn. All right? But this land that had looked so good, but in reality had just brought all this pain into their family. And so it's a return.
I feel like it's kind of like the
beginning of the redemption story.
It's like the story of Israel in all the Old Testament, where God constantly is calling his people to return to him. Because it's like they had seasons and times where they would follow after other gods, and they'd get called up in, different situations, and God was constantly calling them, hey, return to me. So I just feel like this is kind of like, I almost feel like it represents like the story of the Old Testament and what he was constantly doing in them, Something interesting to me, so the way my Bible breaks it up, in the beginning portion, it just says, Elimelech moves his family to Moab. And then we read that. And the second portion says, Naomi and Ruth return to Bethlehem. And it goes back to that return to Bethlehem. But the word Bethlehem is interesting because me looking up all these words and what they mean. It means house of bread. So Bethlehem, house of bread. And that to me is fascinating because why did they leave? They left because it was a famine. It was a drought going on. So they were leaving Bethlehem and going to this other place that they thought, okay, this will provide for us. This looks good. This will be rich. This will be fertile land. This will be what we need. And so we're going to uproot from the house of bread and we're going to go to this place that looks like it's going to provide for us. Yeah. But as we see, not only was this an enemy of Israel, but we see that tragedy happened there for them. Tragedy, death. So it's just that in the spiritual, sometimes when we go through a season of drought, in our lives. When we go through a season of spiritual, famine, and I've been through it, you've been through it, where it's like, okay, God, I can't hear you. I don't know what you're doing. It just feels dry. Sometimes there's a temptation to leave and go somewhere that looks, Ben just mentioned it, it looks like the grass is greener on the other side. It looks like, but just like you said, we have no business being there. Right? And just to get you a picture of Moab, again, it's not just about them going and getting food. Moab was a pagan nation that didn't follow after God. And not only that, we told the story about how God judged them for that season of time where they didn't let Israel go through the land. But they treated Israel harsh. There was hasn't happened yet, basically, but during Saul's reign, the Moabites attacked him. During David's reign, the Moabites attacked Israel. So there was this tension, and it's really interesting when you look at Isaiah. So it'd be Isaiah 15 and 16. There is a prophecy that is against Moab. So it's all of chapter 15 and 16, and it's absolutely fascinating. But I just wanted to read a few verses of just the imagery that you get of why she needed to return to Bethlehem, the house of bread. So verse 10, so it's chapter 16, verse 10. Gone now is the gladness, gone the joy of harvest. There will be no singing in the vineyards, no more happy shouts, no treading of grapes in the winepress. I have ended all their harvest joys. My heart's cry for Moab is like a lament on a harp. I am filled with anguish for I can't pronounce that right word. The people of Moab will worship at their pagan shrines, but it will do them no good. They will cry out to the gods in their temples, but no one will be able to save them. The Lord has already said these things about Moab in the past, but now the Lord says, within 3 years, counting each day, the glory of Moab will be ended. From its great population, only a few of its people will be left alive. So just to give you this imagery, like this hasn't happened yet, but this is why they had to get out of Moab. Moab was not their home. Mm-hmm. Bethlehem was their home. The house of bread where God could actually provide was their home. Yeah. So just to give that imagery of understanding what's the big deal of them being in Moab and why they had to get out. Yeah. Yeah, but if you get time, read Isaiah 15 and 16. It's fascinating.
And this is that thing of where you start to see the whole Bible connect. Yes. And I know we talk about that all the time. It was part of the reason we wanted to talk about something in the Old Testament. We've done a bunch of New Testament stuff. Yeah. We want to talk about something in the Old Testament just to show... Yeah. Continue to show you just how the whole Bible connects together, right? In the story. So it goes on and says in verse 10, now, no, they said. So Naomi said, go away. And they said, no, we want to go with you to your people. But Naomi replied, why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No. My daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to remarry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. So a couple things there. That may sound like a weird conversation that Naomi's having of like, what if I got married tonight and had kids? You're gonna wait for my boys to get older. So that it refers to an old custom where if you had two brothers and one brother was married and then he died and left his wife behind, but they hadn't had any sons yet. Yeah. Then the custom is that the younger brother or the other brother would marry the wife, would marry the widow, so that they could produce a son that would carry on the first brother, the dead brother's legacy, carry on his name, carry on the genealogy, carry on even the inheritance. It would be somebody for the inheritance to pass down to, because they didn't pass inheritance down to the daughters, they passed it down to the sons, and so it would be a place for his inheritance to go, so then the widow would still get it. So that was the custom. So that's why she's having this odd conversation of like, what do you think I'm going to do? Have more sons and grow up and marry my other kids? So that's what that talks about. But then also here you get the first glimpse at the bitterness that Naomi is dealing with internally, where she sees everything that's happening as really a punishment from God. And so I think that's going to come into play here in just a couple seconds. So
I think she's telling them, like, hey guys, I don't have anything to offer you. Like, I just put that in modern day terms. She's laying it all out for them, and she's just letting them know, if you come with me, I have nothing for you. I can't take care of you.
Right. And so it says, and again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, so she convinced Orpah. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. Look, Naomi said to her, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. And now Ruth is about to give probably one of the most quoted scriptures from the Old Testament that is often quoted at weddings. I've heard it quoted at weddings. Yeah, I've heard it quoted at weddings before, and which is kind of odd because it's Ruth talking to her mother-in-law. It's not a husband to a wife or a wife to a husband. But here's what Ruth says. This is her response of, why don't you just go back to your people, go back to your gods. You should do the same that Orpah has done. And this is Ruth's reply in verse 16. She says, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she had nothing more to say.
Meanwhile, Gazelle's just going down the road.
Gazelle's living up to her name right there. She's running.
She's already back home.
She's running away like a gazelle at that point, all right? So Orpah leaves. And listen, it's not to find fault with Orpah.
Yeah.
She did what made sense. And this is important, okay? She did what made sense. It was the easy choice. It was the logical choice. There's no fault on her for choosing it. She did completely what was expected in that scenario. That wasn't completely what was expected to do there. And Naomi was encouraging her, bleeding with her 3 times.
She released her.
3 times she says, you need to leave me and go back to your family. But then we have this plot twist where Ruth refuses to leave. And Ruth does what is unexpected. She, instead of doing what would be known, I could go back to my family and I know what it would be like there if I move back to my family. But instead she chooses the unknown. She chooses what could potentially be a really, really hard future. A future with no husband, no kids, no nothing. Potentially living the life of a beggar as a servant or as a slave even. And this is not just, and the significance of this choice is not just simply geographical. It's not just like, hey, you know what? We've been in Moab my whole life. You know what? I'd like a change of scenery. It's not geographical, but
the mountains in Israel are amazing.
It's literally a change of beliefs and identity.
Yes.
Right? Because she says, your people are now my people. And your God is now my God. It's a change of beliefs. It's a change of identity. It's a change. Ruth says, I am going all in. I am 100% absolutely committed. Ruth chooses the God of Israel over the God of her youth, the false gods of her youth. And I feel like this is an example, because sometimes people ask this question, well, if the nation of Israel is God's chosen people and that's who God honored, like, how did people get saved in the Old Testament? It was if there was no Jesus. Ruth just did it.
Yes, and there's more than just Ruth that had that example.
No, absolutely. But Ruth, but this is an example of it. I just wanted to point that out. It's an example of salvation in the Old Testament, where she turns her back on her gods and says, "Your God is now my God." The God of Israel is now my God. That's who I serve. That's who I worship. And it's interesting because then from there, if you go to Matthew, Ruth is actually listed in the genealogy.
Matthew chapter 1.
Yeah, one of only a couple of women that are listed in the genealogy of Jesus. And it's just interesting because it was this unexpected choice that will lead her to eventually, at the end of this book, this unexpected choice will lead her to become the great-grandmother of King David.
Yes.
And I just thought all that was
amazing.
Yeah.
Like, so the chapters before that, when Naomi is telling her, I can't have any more sons, I can't give you security, I can't give you protection, and she's basically saying, I can't offer you anything. I feel like at that moment, Ruth had to count the cost. She had to count the cost of staying with Naomi and what that was going to mean. And she was willing to put that aside and stay with her. She says she clings to her. But that famous scripture there that, that says, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people and your God will be my God. Like, you said it, like you can't skip over the fact and miss the fact that she is choosing God at that point. It's not just, I want to hang out with my mother-in-law, I have dependency issues. It is a choice that she's making, a deliberate choice of, I am turning my back on, because, it says, go back to your mother's home. And what would come with that is that way of life, those gods, that lifestyle, all of that. And so what she's doing is she's not only, so this is where this name thing comes in. She's not only being an incredible friend to Naomi. Her name means friend, friendship. She's not only becoming a friend or being a friend of Naomi, she becomes a friend of God. She's no longer, look at where she comes from. She comes from a place where they're enemies of God.
Right.
Now she becomes a friend of God. And it really is, I look at that as like a conversion moment. And it's not anymore because of obligation, because her husband's dead. There's no obligation. Naomi has released her. She said, go back. So it's not obligation. It's not a I'll follow you, God, your God, because I have to. It is now like a choice that she's made, and it's a true conversion of, I'm making this choice for myself to stay with you, and just not skipping over that part that she's choosing God.
Yeah.
And
so I would say this, how do we tie this into our lives, is don't be afraid of the hard choices. This single decision of Ruth's to stay with Ruth, or to stay with Naomi, to leave her homeland, to go to a new land, to potentially give up the possibility of being remarried and having kids, to turn her back on the false God and make this decision, this recognition that God, the God of Israel, is the true God. These are all really, really hard choices that seemingly don't necessarily have a great future in store, but it's what she feels led to do. And so I would look at that and just encourage you, don't be afraid of making the hard choices.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of making the choices even when they don't seem like they have a future.
Yeah.
Even when it seems like even if you have the choice between what is known and what is unknown, the unknown is always going to be the hard choice. But if that's the direction God leads you, if you put your trust in Him and He's leading you into the unknown, take the leap.
Yeah.
Right? So, again, I go back to that statement I heard a pastor say one time, is the choices you make today determine the stories that you'll tell tomorrow.
Right.
And sometimes we have to make hard choices so that we can tell better stories.
But think about, and he already mentioned it, that it puts her, if you go to Matthew, she's in the lineages, how you say that? Lineage of Jesus. But it's this thing where exactly the choice that she made, she chose the God of Israel. Yes, she chose Naomi to stay with her. She chose the God of Israel. Therefore, God made her a part of His plan. And it's just that, I don't know, it's even more special because it's unexpected. She's a Moabite. She's not an Israelite. So that makes it even more special to me. Yeah.
Which again just really speaks to the redemption story of all of this. Is she came from a people that had been told, they had been cut off and told, you cannot be a part of the assembly of God, and yet she chose God and was brought into the people. So It's good. All right.
19.
19. So the two of them continued. Where am I going? Okay. So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi? The women asked. Don't call me Naomi, she responded. Instead, call me Mara. I'm trying to be dramatic. She sounds very dramatic here. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?
Mm-hmm. That's where that name thing comes back into play, right? Where Naomi, she says, "Don't call me Naomi. Don't call my life sweet. Don't call this pleasant. Don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me Mara. Call me bitter, because this is where I'm at in my life right now." So it matters their names here.
Yeah. And again, it just the phrasing, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Yeah. In other words, I thought this was interesting, is when she's talking about when she left Bethlehem, she was full. In the middle of a famine, she was full. Why? Because even though they didn't have a lot of food, she had a lot of happiness. Yeah. She had a husband. Yeah. She was married. Yeah. She had the future to look forward to with her husband, to create a family. She had her sons. They had the basics, They were struggling with food, and so then the husband says, "You know what? The grass looks greener over in Moab. Let's go over there." And as a result of that decision of trying to make provision apart from God, because was it God's plan for them to leave the house of bread? Yeah. To go? Right. And so she says, I had all these things, and everything was good. And then it wasn't. Yeah. And so she says, I left full, and I came back. She left married. She left with 2 sons. She came back widowed. She came back childless. And all she has to show for this decades-long journey, right? We know it was at least 10 years. The boys died 10 years. Yeah. So we know it was at least a decade and longer. All she has to show for this journey when she comes home is Ruth. Yeah, Ruth, yeah. There's an emptiness there, but Ruth is the only thing that comes back. Now, it's going to be a good thing that she came back with Ruth, but she limps home at the end of this journey bitter at God and bitter at life. Yeah.
I looked at that and, not to I always say that, not to over spiritualize it, but every time I read something like this, I'm trying to put it into what does this mean for me? And so she makes this statement, I went away full, but I've been brought home empty. And I think, I look at my life and places of my life where, maybe I felt like I was just full and everything was great. And then I've gone through seasons of just feeling completely empty, completely lost, and completely like, what are you doing, God? But it's in those desperate moments of completely empty that God can actually work. Yeah. Right. And there, you guys know the verse that says, my grace is sufficient. My power is made perfect in what? What is my power made perfect in? Your weakness, like that emptiness. She's at her weakest point right here, saying, I have nothing to offer, and I'm empty. But those are the moments that God actually can work in our life. Yeah. And what we'll see right now, like Naomi doesn't see it yet. And sometimes we don't see it when we're right in that moment. But what she doesn't see is you talk about full. If she thought she was full with what she had, she's about to just get, overwhelmed with the blessings. And then blessings that she will never see in her lifetime, that are going to come after that. But Naomi couldn't see behind her pain. She could not see beyond her pain, I should say. And we get in those moments sometimes to the point where we even want to change our name. Don't call my life this. Call me now this. And again, think of purpose. We no longer want to follow the purpose that we know God has for us. We want to change that purpose and make it some devastating thing because we can't see beyond our pain. So I read this and I thought of my own story, because she says, don't call my life sweet anymore. Don't call me sweet or pleasant. Call me bitter. And so my name is Joy. And I have gone through seasons of depression in my life. And I literally have had the devil mock me in my head and say to me, your name is Joy, but you're not happy. You're not, like, that's such a joke that your name is Joy. That's such a joke, you know. And he didn't give me an alternative name, but it was that, like, he wanted my purpose to be sad. He wanted my purpose to be depressed. He wanted my purpose to be oppressed. And so, like, you have to see beyond the moments of pain and see that there's more to the story. Like, we're ending this chapter, and we know, you know, I've already read ahead. I know there's more to the story. Yeah. But you look at Naomi and where she's at. She's come home and she's like, you know, don't call my life pleasant anymore. Call it bitter. Why is she saying that? Because she can't see beyond her pain, and she doesn't know there's more to the story. Like, it's about to get good. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think, like, we have to put ourselves in that position too of understanding we go through seasons of pain and emptiness, but you know, when we continue to trust God and look to Him and come back to the house of bread, come back to the place of provision, then, you know, we need to know that God has more for us. Mm-hmm. It's not the end of our story. That would be a sad ending if that were the end. That's not the end.
It's not the end. And so we have this one transition verse in the story. In verse 22, it says, "So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest." And I thought that was so neat, because it's just this spring is the time where things were dead in the winter, but spring brings life. Yeah. And so here they return. Yeah. Just as we see the green grass return in the spring, the leaves return to the trees. Yeah. All these things return in spring. It really does speak to this.
It's almost like
a new life.
Hope.
Yeah.
They returned.
Hope springs eternal.
And there's hope.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I didn't have too much more.
No, that's all.
Because it's an ending right there. Right?
So yeah, I would just say as we continue to read, you know, be thinking about this as you go. Is what choices have you made in your life, or maybe what choices has somebody in your life made for you that has kind of maybe left you a little bitter. Yeah. Little kind of looking for hope, not knowing what the direction is going to be, or maybe you're facing a choice that seems like a hard one. You don't know which. Should you take the easy road or the hard road? I want you to be praying about that. Be thinking about that as we get ready to go. Look for those people in your life. Who's the Ruth in your life? Who are the friends in your life? Mm-hmm. These are the things we want you to look for as we continue on in the story. So be praying about that this week. Is there bitterness towards a situation, towards a person, towards a decision, towards a choice? Are you facing an easy road versus hard road, and trying to pray through what decision to make? Sometimes it's not always. Sometimes God lets us take the easy road, but sometimes He wants to take us to the hard road. Yeah. Because He has something for us at the end of it. There's a line in verse, what would this be? Verse 7 maybe? And it says they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. And I just been talking about that word return, and I just think like, in our own lives, if we know we've taken the wrong turn, we've been going down the wrong road, we've been in the wrong place, and we need to come back to the house of bread, the house of provision, the house of God. We know we need to come back to that. Like, again, it's just that encouragement to see in this story that, like, God's calling us. He's calling us to return back to Him. It's good. There it is. Chapter 1. Ruth chapter 1. We got 3 more chapters to go. So we hope you'll come back next week to join us for that. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way you can always find us easily. You don't got to search for us. We're right there in your subscriptions. Even better, hit the little bell up there and you will be notified every time we post a new video. You'll get a little notification there. It makes life even easier. That's what we're here for, is make your life easier. Okay, if you're watching on Facebook or listening to us anywhere that you can leave a comment or anything like that, please do so. We'd love to hear from you. I think that's it for now. So until next time, have a great week, and we'll see you next week on Lunch with PB&J. Bye guys.